Courtney, you had mentioned the use of sharpshooters and that it's sort of the last resort for the most part. What are we seeing in 2019, this fall hunting season, in the sale of licenses in those disease management areas? Are hunters responding to the call for help, or do you need us hunters to be a little more responsive in those areas?
I think that currently right now, education is so important when it comes to managing chronic wasting disease in the state. So in a lot of our DMAP units, so that stands for Deer Management Assistance Program, should probably cover that first. Within these units, hunters can actually apply for 2 additional antlerless deer tags that are called DMAP permits within these areas. And each DMAP permit allows for the harvest of 1 antlerless deer. The primary reason for these within our disease management area, these DMAP units and the allocation of these DMAP permits is to harvest more deer and allow hunters to have that opportunity, that first opportunity to harvest deer and help us control chronic wasting disease. In DMAP units that have been kind of established, that have been around since 2012 when we first, in the areas where people who are really familiar with chronic wasting disease, we tend to see fairly good sales on our DMAP permits. However, in the new ones, not as much. We have some of our DMAP units that we probably haven't had even 5% of the permits that are allocated being sold yet. So that is really our primary way of giving hunters that first opportunity. So we are, again, in the draft response plan, we are looking at ways to improve and to open up even more opportunities for hunters, but we just don't have that capability this year.
Okay. So do you know if one of the things that we're looking at is that you mentioned there's a limit to 2 in these DMAP areas? Do you think we're going to lift that limit in the future?
It's definitely something that would be considered,
Okay.
is to lift that, because we can give all the tags we want, but if people are not filling those tags, then just raising the amount isn't going to be successful.
Okay.
So
those decisions come through the commissioners. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that those decisions would be made through the commissioners. And right now, with the draft response plan, all the things that we are proposing in it are actually open for public comment until February 29th, 2020. So a lot of that won't be decided. The draft response plan is really a living, breathing document that could look different by this time next year. So we really want public's opinions on this draft response plan and the options we're proposing, and we want to know whether it's going to be supported or not.
Okay. So. Not sure if you can answer this question or not, but I know in some states there are different hunting seasons for different species, and there are goals set for harvest numbers. And once those numbers are met, the season stops. There's an announcement, be it mountain lions or whatever, that stops. Do you know if something along those lines is possible in Pennsylvania, that we could say, in this disease management area, we are looking to harvest 200 deer. And then once we collect 200 heads, we're done for the year?
So what we've actually talked about this. So we know how important it is to keep our hunters updated with information, especially if, let's say, we do have these 3-mile radius zones where we need X amount of deer to be harvested to help prevent the spread of CWD. We would want our hunters to know where they're at. Is it going to be real-time information? No, we won't be able to do that, but to try and have maybe a number on our website, maybe to send out a letter mid-season, mid-hunting season, to let our hunters know that, hey, this is where we're currently at with our management goals. We still have this many more deer that we would like to have harvested. And then once we reach those goals, to let people know, that's really what we can do. We could maybe make those tags kind of like null and void after we reach the goals, but it would be hard to ensure that everybody would know that. I mean, we put out information all the time through newspapers, radio. We do public programs. We have things on our website, and there's still people out there who don't even know what CWD is.
Sure.
So, yes, I think we would just have to be really lenient on how we respond to that. If we would say, okay, this tag is now null and void because we've reached our goal, and then somebody would still harvest a deer with that tag.
Sure.
I think we would have to be fairly lenient
Okay.
with that. I think the most important part about that is just trying to keep our hunters updated in those areas, to let them know where we currently stand, and then they can make that decision from there whether they want to continue to use those tags or not. But
Okay.
we wouldn't really know that until next year.
Right. But the important thing is, you just mentioned, this is a proposal that the Game Commission is seeking public input on. I hear from several people in my travels and discussions with people that, quote, the Game Commission doesn't listen. And my response to them is always, have you ever come to a commission meeting, and can they hear us if we're not speaking to them? So you're kind of touching on that now, that hunters are being asked to be partners in this. And if we harvest a deer in that disease management area, no one knows about that without the deer head being collected.
In a head collection bin. We don't know
Right.
unless you put it in a head collection bin.
So even reporting it in those disease management areas, reporting it is not the final step in the process. The head collection box is.
Yeah, that's
and
really
it's very
crucial.
important that we make sure we get those heads into those boxes. So I appreciate that. So with all of these unknowns with CWD and the deer herd, and there are a lot of deer hunters out there in Pennsylvania. You touched on this a little bit with the sale or the lack of sale of DMAPs. What's your speculation on the landscape of hunting in Pennsylvania, and how will that be affected by CWD potentially over the next 10, 20, 30, even longer from now?
I would actually say that chronic wasting disease is already starting to change the landscape of hunting in Pennsylvania. I mean, if you consider the fact that within our disease management areas, there are now restrictions on hunters, and that alters our hunters' traditional way of doing things. No longer do we want you to, is it acceptable to really take your deer and just throw it in the back 40? Within a disease management area, is it legal? Yes, you can do that, but we highly discourage you from doing so. Now we're asking hunters to properly dispose of these parts, either by putting them in with their commercial trash, double bagging them and put them in with their commercial trash so they can go to a lined landfill, or by putting your high-risk parts in a high-risk parts dumpster provided by the Game Commission. So it's already starting to change some of the landscape of hunting, and I do have, with the unknowns in relation to chronic wasting disease and its potential effects on humans, I have a lot of people who call in and they're scared to consume meat from deer now. And that could significantly affect kind of our hunting culture in Pennsylvania. So it's already starting to have an effect. And if this disease, which it looks like it will unless we do something, continues to spread and continues to increase across the state, that could definitely have an effect on the number of hunters that continue to participate in hunting. We've done some surveys to see how chronic wasting disease will affect hunter participation, and we definitely have some die-hard hunters up there that say, no matter what, I'm going to continue to hunt deer. And that's honestly what we need. But we do see a trend not only in Pennsylvania through these surveys, but also in other states, that as the prevalence increases, there's going to be more hunters that are less willing to harvest deer. And it's just because of the potential risks.
And I've seen statistics that seem to indicate that deer hunting is the driver of upwards of 90% of license sales in North America for hunting license sales. So that's a pretty big change in the landscape. If we have hunters that are reluctant to hunt deer, they probably won't buy a hunting license. I mean, we're facing the decline in participation in our outdoor activities now, be it hunting or fishing. And And CWD could potentially be just another pressure in having that participation rate at least stay steady, if not increase.
Right. And also in our surveys, one of the things we often ask our hunters is, or the public is, people who used to hunt and they haven't been buying hunting licenses, we do ask them, why are you not hunting anymore? What specifically is the reason? And so far, we have not really seen a strong response that it is because of chronic wasting disease. And I think that's part of the reason. Part of the reason for that is because our infection rate still is so low in the state.
Yeah.
But I think as that increases, as these surveys would suggest, we probably will have more people who just don't want to take the risk.
I hear a lot of people say, the Game Commission's just blowing this CWD totally out of proportion. They're just scaring hunters, and there's no scientific evidence to support that this disease is so bad. How do you respond to that when you hear those types of concerns from hunters?
So I think that comment actually, a lot of times when I hear it, it's also coupled with, I've never seen a sick deer. So there is kind of seems to be some type of correlation there that if I don't see it, it's not a serious problem. And I can say that we're not trying to blow CWD out of proportion. We're not trying to scare hunters. We're trying to give you the facts. So we have been working and we have been trying to make sure that the public is educated on this disease so that they can make informed decisions about how they want to respond. So like we said, we have this draft response plan up that we want public comment on. We want our hunters and we want the public to be able to make educated decisions about whether or not they're willing to support the options proposed in that response plan. But if you're not educated about chronic wasting disease, if you don't know what it is, how can you make a reasonable decision about whether you would support it or not? So we have people who, whenever they first find out about chronic wasting disease, I get calls from people who are saying, you're not doing enough to educate the public. They want more. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we have people who they've probably been hearing about it for years, and it's probably just, they're talking about it so much, they're blowing this out of proportion. But the reality is, all we can do is tell you what we know. We can just give you the facts that we know, and we can tell you what research is finding currently. That's all we can do. And unfortunately, a lot of the facts, a lot of the research that is information that comes out about chronic wasting disease, it is scary. The nature of it in itself is scary. Saying that there is a disease out there that currently there is no cure or vaccine for, and it's always fatal, and there has been no example of this disease burning itself out naturally, that's a scary thought. So, I don't know what else we can do other than give the information out there and just hope that people make the right decisions based off of that.